Okay, so we're going through Philippians. And I just want to really talk about where we've been. We're not very far. We'll get there. Very beginning of Philippians, we talked about this idea of partnership. The Greek word's koinonia. And I just want to say this real quick. It's the idea that church, the point of church, obviously is vertical and horizontal. The point of church is that we give our lives in praise and adoration to Jesus for what He paid, and for the Father for sending Him, creating. That's the vertical purpose. But the horizontal purpose is community. And if you think church is anything different than community with other people, intimate community, then you have missed the point of church. Like if you think church is a program or a service, like you have been mistaught, and you need to understand the importance of koinonia community. And I'll say this. Here's the main reason why. With church planning, I study people. Like I love the logic of studying people. People 35 and under, we call them millennials. I don't like giving anyone labels. People 35 and under, here's what they're interested in. They're interested in something real, authentic, and they're interested in community with other people. They are not going to come to just some random building for a worship service. I'm just being honest. So we need to understand, which is good, what they care about. And I'm not even saying for the right motives yet. A lot of this care is probably from a selfish, I'm lost care. But it's still what they're searching out is what the church has always meant to be from the beginning. So we need to understand how important is community. And seeing that happen here locally and seeing it happen out there outside of our community. So the more and more I sit and think through these things, and I praised this 2 weeks ago. I think we do this very well. We can grow, but we do this very well. I made a flow chart last week and lost my mind with the next part of Philippians 1. I just actually want to read it. I promise to be quick on this other stuff. The reason is I think it's going to be painful, maybe for some of the hearers, so it's like a Band-Aid, just rip it off fast. It's not as bad. So that's what we're going to do with the next chunk I have of Philippians. We're going to rip that Band-Aid off fast, and hopefully you'll bandage the wound and let it heal. Let me read this. 9 through 11 in Philippians 1. This is all we went over. This is Paul's prayer. Paul prayed for very ideal things to happen. You should too. Don't pray for average, normal things to happen. Like it's God of the universe. You can pray pretty big. And when Paul prayed, he didn't I hope most of these people get along. That wasn't his prayer. Okay, it was big, challenging, a high standard. And he says this, I pray this, that your love will keep on growing in knowledge and every kind of discernment. That's confusing. Why would love do that? We'll talk in a second. So you can approve the things that are superior and can be pure and blameless in the day of Christ, filled with the fruit of righteousness that comes through Jesus Christ to the glory and praise of God. So we talked about this. That actually means that abounding love would overflow into two areas that we think, why would that affect those two areas? Why would love? Because we think love's a feeling. We don't understand this godly agape covenant love that changes how we see things and the decisions we make. Because when love is not selfish, it doesn't, like I said, doesn't seek its own, hopes all things, believes all things, trusts all things, all these things about love, the overflow of that love changes what I know to be true and the decisions I make. We talked about how you could get that. The only way to get this overflow of love is through intimacy with God. All right, the problem is, as I explained, this is a flow chart and you skip a step, it doesn't work. You can't skip a step in a process and get it. So this is a flow chart that we see in this prayer. And the reason I want to see things for how they really are through the love of God, make decisions, is so that my values and priorities, look at this. Look back at verse 10. So that you can approve the things that are superior. We have a hard time. I think we get caught up in life and we have a hard time. We lose sight of what really matters. And the way I described this last week is it sometimes, unfortunately, takes a life-altering event or a terminal illness to wake us up and see what is superior and what we should have our values and priorities set right. But the love of God can provide that. We don't need tragedy to strike to figure out what really matters. All right? So that's good. So check this out. We find out what really matters through the love of God. Knowing what is true, decisions we make shows us what we really do prioritize in life. Not what we say, but we can see it in how we live. And it leads to these things: sincere and blameless. Sincere means genuine, that you're the real deal. We talked about that for a while last week, that the overflow of God would set you, have the right priorities in life and how you function, and people will look at you and you're not a fake. This is the real thing. And then the second part's pretty amazing. This blameless means it's a path with no crooked turns. It's a smooth path. And I would ask you this: with what you know to be true and the decisions you make and the priorities you have, you're either on a smooth path of life or a destructive, bumpy path of life. And we can look at what you say is important and the decisions you make and really show how life's working out for you. Now, that doesn't mean that tragedy, unforeseen things don't strike. But what I'm saying is a blameless life is this. And I gave a few examples. That making horrible financial decisions may lead to bankruptcy or whatever. All right? These are the things that it's talking about. If we get our eyes set and understand, okay, then we can be on a path that doesn't lead to destruction and actually a light to the world. So that was my flow chart. It took 50 minutes. It shouldn't have, but it did. So we're going to move on to 12 through 26. We're going to use Paul as a case study. So Paul describes some things in his life in this chunk, and we're going to examine that and figure out, why was Paul able to think and act and believe like this? Because this is going to be very important to us. So I titled this "Seeing Life Outside of Yourself." And I'm going to challenge you if maybe you struggle with that, and I think honestly we do. Like this is the beauty of Memorial Day. I can say things and not get arrested. Okay? And understanding what has happened. And I can even say things that in some countries might be somewhat offensive. I can do that here and it be okay legally. You may not think it's okay. But specifically this: white Americans have a hard time seeing outside of themselves. I don't know how else to say it. I'm not one of these overly believe white, we're not going down that road, but I'm saying with the culture we live in and who we are, we have a hard time seeing life outside of ourselves. And I'm not even saying just for even relationship we have a hard time. What I'm saying is we have a hard time not just being selfish with how everything works out for us here in where we find ourselves. I'm not saying that to guilt you. I'm not going to be the guy that guilts you into the fact that you've got a comfortable life, financially or whatever. That's not what I'm doing. But I want us to make sure we see. So today I want you, if you have trouble seeing outside yourself, I want you to try through this next 25 minutes to do that. What we don't understand, we think it's about thinking of others or doing things for others, we think about it as like activities. And that's part of it, but we miss it all if we just think it's about helping someone. So I'm not a selfish person because I go and feed the poor. Well, that's great and good, but that has really nothing to do with whether you think outside yourself or not. Lifestyle and mindset determines if you think about others or not. Not some good deeds you may randomly do. Those are great things, continue to do them, but how you think and what you do really determines, am I about other people or am I about just myself? So let me give you some things. I think we live in a culture, and I'm just going to describe some things. Self-entitled, easily offended, because that's a part of not, if it's about me, it's easy to offend me. Self-centered thinking and perspective, and here's a big one, a victim mentality. As a result of what I would say extreme immaturity. So the beauty of the good news I have for you today, because I'm sounding pretty negative, is the whole point of what we just sang is that we get free from us and we get our eyes and our affections on God and those created in His image. So that's going to be the good news for today, because while this sounds kind of interesting, this life destroys people. They just don't know it. This type of selfish thinking. So I'm going to have to be maybe more, not as, I be very straightforward. Easily offended. This hurt my feelings. This bothered me. This offended me. This is mostly hurting you and making everyone else around you walk on eggshells. Okay, that's easily offended. I really want to point out, here's the biggest one. And I hate to use it, but it's relevant. So if it's relevant, we got to talk about it. The biggest thing I see in this issue can be best demonstrated on the garbage people share on Facebook. I don't know how to say it any better. But for the fact that we, even as maybe believers, would share or post something about how evil Muslims are and live in some sort of insane reality that a Muslim who doesn't know Jesus may not see that or not. Like to share something out or to say something and not be focused or worried about the impact it may have on the people around us shows us a huge problem. Is anybody following me right now? Because I think this is an enormous problem, and Paul's going to help us. Okay? Here's another big one. If I just went political, I'm going to have to just read a small statement, because I've seen this posted recently. And I'm not choosing a side. I'm just going to say the statement. Lazy, cowardly, ignorant, whining liberals. Are you kidding me? To think so much within ourselves that may not affect or hurt, or does that produce any fruit or do anything good for anyone? With something like that being put out there. So here's what it does. I'm not trying to be shock value. It points to a greater problem. That I live in this imaginary world that is just about my political siding, my beliefs, my skin color, how much money I have, where I live, what I believe to be true about what you should eat, how you should raise your children, and I live inside all that. Now to say this, I believe you can share what you believe. But there's a way to do that. Okay? There's a way to do that. And I think here we're going to figure out some things. So here's what this is going to be. This is going to sound like self-help for most of the time. It's going to be some really good tips on self-help that proves we need to think about people outside of us. And then Paul's going to arrive at why. The reason, and then it's going to destroy the fact that this is a self-help sermon. Because the why behind why he is this way matters. So let's go. Here's a solution case study. How did Paul live life outside of himself? We're going to get to the answer. It had everything to do with his purpose. His purpose dictated everything. We're going to get to that at the end. Here's the first one. Let's read verse 12. I'm going to even say some cheesy things. Now, I want you to know, brothers, that what has happened to me has actually resulted in the advance of the gospel. So Paul is in prison. And he just finds it really a good idea to point out, hey, I just want you to know, all this stuff that's happened to me has actually resulted in the gospel going out. It's resulted in good things. And I would just want to call this the glass half full mentality. Okay? Glass half full mentality. And this idea that there is some truth to that. That sounds really self-help. We can always see things in a positive or negative way. If you look at what happened to Paul, he was always showing and pointing out the positive things in life. And he did this not just to help himself feel better, but he knew it was affecting, hey Reeves, hey David, go back and talk to your son. Just real quick. Okay, Dorothy's got it. There was a guy come in. We need to probably figure out if he needs help or anything. We don't need to pretend to do church. We can stop and actually address a real problem. Okay? Where was I? Okay. Paul. Always positive. Why was he always positive? Because if you read him, he was. Had nothing to do, again, with making himself feel better. He knew how it would affect other people. Okay? So Paul, in this situation, for what I just said, a closed-minded person who thinks nothing of themselves, would be whining about the fact that how dare they strip my rights to worship Jesus, to talk about Jesus, and throw me in prison. How dare they do that? And you could whine and complain about all the bad things about that. Is that helpful for anyone around you? Here's the problem with negativity. It's like mud. Me picking up mud and throwing it all over you. So, the biblical principle here I see clearly is what Paul's talking about, what he's going through, he's done in such a positive way that it's actually encouraging the people around him and not discouraging. So if you walk into a room and you've had a bad day and you can complain about all your bad stuff and throw that mud on everybody else because you're thinking about you and this feels good for the moment. But why don't we, and you'll see why here in a second, when we speak, understand we're speaking and it's actually affecting other people around us. We're thinking about other people and not ourselves. All right, so that's glass half full. Here's the second part of that. We see that in verse 13. Just kind of categorize, he wasn't a victim, he's a volunteer slave. Verse 13, so it has become known throughout the whole imperial guard and to everyone else that my imprisonment is in the cause of Christ. So there's some other translations that make it more clear. Here's always saying, I'm not enslaved in prison, I'm enslaved in Christ. Like you can't make me a victim. You can't take anything from me, okay? Because I have Christ. I have this position with him, put me in prison, do whatever you want to me, but I'm not a victim here. And this was Paul's attitude. What's amazing about both these things is people that are negative and people that are victims are miserable people. And that misery is getting on other people and it's destroying your own life. Because it's just so self-centered. And like I said earlier, the good news of the gospel is that we get over ourselves. Like everybody's mad in the Bible when it says deny yourself like it's some bummer. It's the best news you ever had. To get over yourself and be about God and his people. Then you walk in freedom. Like I said this before, and it's not cockiness. You can't offend me. Like you can't. Because you don't determine my value. Now I love you and value you. I'll take your wise counsel. But I'm not a victim anymore. I've graduated through the blood of Jesus to not be a victim anymore. You don't have to walk on eggshells around me. All right? So let's go to the next one. And man, I am scooting through this good. How's the Band-Aid coming off? Fast. Good. You get a glimpse here, moving on, of why he can operate this way. And I just challenge you, 1 and 2 Corinthians, he kind of mentions his life in there. And just look at how he's thinking, his mindset. Philippians 1, 15 through 19. Actually, maybe it's 14. It's 14. Most of the brothers in the Lord, he was focused here on results that really mattered. So watch it through that filter. Results that really mattered. Most of the brothers in the Lord have gained confidence from my imprisonment and dare even more to speak the message fearlessly. So it's not about him being in prison. He's saying, hey, look at the results. Look at what really matters here. Before you throw me a little Paul's in prison pity party, that was 4 P's quick, but I can't do it 5, 6 more times. Before you throw me a pity party, look at what's happening. Look at what really matters. He gets his attention on what really matters. To be sure, some preach Christ out of envy and strife, but others out of goodwill. These do so out of love, knowing that I am appointed for the defense of the gospel. The others proclaim Christ out of rivalry, not sincerely, seeking to cause me anxiety in prison. And look at what he says. Look how he responds to the fact that people are intentionally manipulating Jesus to try to hurt Paul. What does it matter? I love it. He's like, oh, you're trying. What does it matter? Just that in every way, whether out of false motives or true, Christ is proclaimed. So he's focused on what really matters. And he's saying, oh, all this stuff, people are trying to do stuff to hurt me. What does it matter? The goal is being accomplished. Why would I care? He's not thinking about himself. You see how beautiful this is? Because bad stuff's going to happen to you. Like, people aren't going to treat you very good. So what if we start thinking for the results that really matter and thinking outside of ourselves instead of just our little world where everything revolves around us? How more peaceful and amazing would life be? So let's continue on. And in this I rejoice. So look at what he's rejoicing in. He's rejoicing in the fact that people are trying to hurt him with what they're doing. But as a result, Christ is being proclaimed. He's having his own prison, and not a pity party. He's having an actual party in prison about it. I will rejoice for this, because I know this will lead to my deliverance through your prayers and help from the Spirit of Jesus Christ. So I mentioned glass half full. So technically, this is spiritually the little book, Don't Sweat the Small Stuff. Like, in the premise of the book is, why are we so caught up in the things that don't really matter? So that's actually a biblical concept right here. We get hung up on the stuff that doesn't really matter. And if I just had to testify on what I've seen, I've heard a lot of times complaining and gossiping, and guess what it's about? Stuff that doesn't really matter anyways. Like, if we were complaining about some monumental kingdom things, okay, let's assess this. But the stuff I've heard us complaining about is worthless. Doesn't matter. And we get hung up in that kind of stuff. And it causes us to lose sight of what really matters. See, Paul could say, hey, people are trying to hurt my feelings. This prison's really bad. And all of a sudden, what has he done? He's lost sight in the goal and purpose of why he even exists in the first place. So don't let this little stuff that we think is affecting us so badly get our eyes off what really matters. Are we good on that? Okay, so here's the question. Why did Paul have this mentality? And we need to know that. Because if not, you're going to legalistically walk out of here and try to adapt these three principles to your life. I don't want you to do that. The three things that I showed you were just to expose the problem. We're going to talk about the solution, and then you don't even need to try to fix the problem. Verse 20, my eager expectation and hope is that I will not be ashamed about anything, but that now, as always, with all boldness, Christ will be highly honored in my body, whether by life or by death. For me, living is Christ and dying is gain. Check this out. Watch him work through this. Now, if I live on in the flesh, this means fruitful work for me, and I don't know which one I should choose. He's at a crossroads. I am pressured by both. I want both. I have a desire to depart and be with Christ, which is far better. Paul gives you his preference. I choose, if it was up to me, what Paul wants, I want to be with Christ. But guess what? Paul's not about himself and his preferences. He says, but to remain in the flesh is more necessary for you. Since I am persuaded of this, I know that I will remain and continue with all of you for your progress and joy in the faith, so that because of me, your confidence may grow in Christ Jesus when I come to you again. What I love about this section is Paul's apparently a quick decision maker. Like, I make fast decisions. Paul made a fast decision. He's writing mid-sentence, pressure to be with both, don't know which one I should choose, and then he go ahead and he makes that quick decision. He probably already had it decided. He just wanted to let people know his thought process. So here's why Paul had this mentality. He wasn't driven by his preferences and opinions. By the way, your opinion is about the weakest thing in the world you could express. Opinions are how someone feels based off no actual factual information. They're really no good. He wasn't driven by his preferences and opinions and what happened to him, he was driven by these two things. So these are the key. If you've nodded off, these two things, I'm going to pray and we're going to be done. Honoring Christ, look back at verse 20. The whole reason he's doing this is that Christ will be highly honored in my body. That is my goal. That is my focus. Everything I do in life is driven through that purpose. Not what I want, not what sounds good to me, what will highly honor Christ. And then the second, so that's number one and probably over. They're not parallel. Honoring Christ. Number two is, he asked this question, does it benefit others? I think in his whole ministry, if you look at it and what he said, what he did, does it benefit other people? Because we can do a lot of stuff that hurts other people. And we don't even know it because we're just thinking about ourselves. But if imagine what we would do if we just did this. Because we so highly honor Christ and want to reach and connect with people in our own faith. Connect and koinonia with them and reach out and connect with people who are lost, who need the love of Jesus Christ. What if we did this before we spoke, before we did anything, before we posted something on Facebook? Does this benefit other people? Imagine how life would change. And here's the greatest part. Here's what I have to offer you. If your life would be driven by honoring Christ and benefiting others, we don't even have to talk about these three things. It's going to cure your negativity. Because before you speak, you'll be thinking about how's this going to impact Ed when I tell him about this. Is this going to stir him up or is this going to defeat him? Is it going to make him walk away in death or am I going to speak life into him? It's going to do that. And here's what I have to offer you today. Amazing day to offer it. Here's the number one thing that this is all boiled up in is your own freedom. I have to offer you through this way of life freedom. Because when I finally got over myself, and unfortunately it took way too long, I got free. When I got positioned on, I'm going to live life to honor Christ, and I'm going to start thinking about others before myself, I've never had more joy in my life. I've never been more free. Life is good when we live the way we were created to live from the beginning. Let's pray.